Up next, we're going to look at two types of narratives, the master and counter narrative. These are going to be the core framework and theme as we transition over to literature. The master narrative, in layman's terms, is this notion that history is written by the winners. It's an idea that we know and learn is only based off of that one superior perspective. A professor at Clark University in Massachusetts, Michael Bamberg, wrote in his essay considering counter-narratives. He defines the master narrative as a narrative that is deeply embedded in a particular culture that share a particular rhetorical theme that supports a certain desire within that culture. They are selected stories, often exclusionary. He writes that master narratives are frames, according to which courses of events can easily be plotted simply because one's audience is taken to know and accept these courses. So what does this mean? He's suggesting that the master narratives are a framework, in this case, history. The way we've learned modern world history or US history, it's rooted in one perspective, the winner's perspective. So what are some examples of that? This could be, let's say, Pocahontas. She was a young woman who fell in love with an English explorer, John Smith. Just like the Disney movie, right? Or how about Christopher Columbus, how he, quote unquote, discovered America? And what about the Philippine-American War? Do you know anything about that? It was the war of US fighting against Spain over control for the Philippines. Or how about Avatar: The Last Airbender, with the Fire Nation schools rewriting history? Remember that clip from the course trailer where Aang is questioning the legitimacy of the teacher's question? The teacher asks the question, what year did the Fire Lord battle the Air Nation army? And Aang is confused because he's like, is that a trick question? Air nomads didn't have a formal military. They were ambushed. And how does Aang know this? The teacher replies with, I don't know how you could possibly know more than our national history book. And so there it is, the master narrative, right? The perspective that is written by the winners that's being perpetuated here by this teacher. And so, like I said earlier, how does Aang know this? Just like the image here, spoiler alert, but the show is called Avatar: The Last Airbender. He knows the counter narrative because he was there 100 years ago, and he knows the culture of the air nomads. They don't host military offense. They're monks. The counter narrative. These are stories that challenge the dominant narrative. They're our stories, the untold ones, that disrupt the normality of the master narrative, and they alter another perspective. Counter-narratives create a sense of self and identity that maneuvers simultaneously between being complicit and countering established narratives that give guidance to one's actions, but at the same time constrain and delineate one's agency. So what does this mean? Lots of big words here. The counter-narrative, like it states right here, creates a sense of self and identity because it brings in another perspective. The counter-narrative happens simultaneously, and because often these untold stories challenge the dominant narrative, they hold withheld truths, just like the example with Aang, right? If we look at this image, the Fire Nation is ambushing the air nomads. They don't have a formal military, and Aang knows this. That's the withheld truth. That's the untold story that disrupts the master narrative. So let's look back at our examples. If you look a little bit into the history of Pocahontas, she has a real name that's not Pocahontas. She's more of a teenager, like an 11-year-old girl, somewhere around early teenage years, that was forced into a relationship with a guy named John Rolfe. And many of us know this now, but Christopher Columbus, he enacted genocide. He wasn't somebody who discovered America. There was already indigenous peoples here, hence why the day has been changed to Indigenous Peoples Day. For the Philippine-American War, how many Filipino soldiers served in that war? And how many of them weren't compensated? A lot of them weren't compensated. Not until Obama's presidency did he recognize the Filipino-American veterans that were still alive. And just like I reiterated with Avatar: The Last Airbender, right here, there is no Air Nation army. The monks fought out of self-defense, as we could see playing in the background here. We see the monks fought to their death. Let's transition to some independent reading. Head over to Google Classroom And under the classwork tab, you're going to find lesson 2.2. What is the master and counter narrative? Why is it important to have counter narratives that challenge master narratives? Whether you decide to read along, listen only, or listen and read along, either or, whichever works best for you. Once you're done, write your response on Google Classroom to the discussion thread. So whether you decided to read first or watch this instructional video first, I hope that gave you a clearer understanding of what the master and counter narrative are to help you inform your response to the discussion thread on lesson 2.2. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.